Man, this is such a pleasure. I got my guy up here. Sherrod Blakely has come in now, and you're in the podcast world. And so you
Yes.
have your own little network going on. How are you doing, first of all, you and your family?
We're good, man. We're good. I'm glad to be here, Cedric. And you know what the best part about this right now, Cedric? You and I are together, and it ain't Black History Month.
Well, it's coming soon, bro.
You know?
Well, you know what? It actually is Black History Month because Trump is gone.
Oh,
So it's Black History Month. Let's talk a little bit about, how you've been doing, the pandemic, what you've seen. I talked to your guy for a while, and who was down in the bubble, and Gary Washburn just told me all kind of great things about how the bubble life, your life has changed because you've moved on from a former station.
Yeah, things are definitely different, and I'm kind of in this new normal outside of the bubble and the pandemic and all that, and it's been really amazing. There's a couple different things I'm in the process of working with. Obviously, joining the CLSN Media family is one of those things which I'm really excited about. The podcast that you referenced to, the A-List with myself and Kwani Lunis, I'm really excited about that because, as you know better than anyone, I tend to flap my gums a lot. I got a lot to say. And this podcast is going to allow a lot of those conversations that I've had off to the side or in the corner of the cafeteria at the Celtics game to actually come to life. It will make some people uncomfortable. It will make some people laugh. But my goal with the podcast is to educate, enlighten, and hopefully entertain as we go through this journey. And I think we'll do that. And it seems that, we're starting to get a nice robust start to things, kicking things off today. And at some point, Cedric, you and I, we're going to get together and do our thing because that's what we do.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about it. There's some other projects I'm working on that I can get into a little bit later on in early 2021 that are really, really just, for me, bucket list type things that you always wanted to do and you never really had the opportunity to do, and you're doing. One of those things for me is teaching. I've always wanted to teach at the college level, and I'm doing that right now at Boston University, representing my team. And so again, there's a lot of, this is just an exciting time for me, and that's really, as tough as the pandemic has been for so many of us, for folks like myself, it is been almost reinvigorating, allowing me to try some things and look in some places to advance my career and to things I want to do, and not have a lot of the layers to kind of go through and frankly have the time to do now.
That's one of the things I said. I think there was a long line that they wanted me to write about you, and I said, truly, my friend, my brother, but what he's going to do, he's going to shed light on the truth. And I think that's in today's world, that's all you want. If somebody comes up to you and tells you the truth, what more do you want right now?
Right.
Because when you get the truth told to you, it's like, okay, well, now I can deal with everything else. I don't have to deal with this is the way it is, and this is how the world is going.
Right. And we get into those conversations. With our very first episode, we talked to Mark Spears, who was down in the bubble as well. And him and I, we had a conversation about just how athletes are going to utilize that platform that was in a very confined space. How are they going to do that going forward? We also talked about the Lakers, and he had some very interesting things to say about how they won their title and how, frankly, the path that they took, even though people talking about how challenging it was to win it in a bubble, he had some insight that shows a different side of that. And
I hate them. Oh, I'm sorry. Did they come across? I'm sorry. My bad. Damn. You got
exactly.
me. When people get all excited, I just have my best friend whose birthday is today, one of my line brothers. Mm-hmm. And he said his birthday was today. And he was telling me, he said, well, how is it going to be now that the Clippers are going to have to watch the Lakers get their championship rings? I said, that won't happen. I said, them dudes will be back in the locker room someplace having some tea or having some sandwiches. Ain't nobody going to watch that.
Right. And even if they could watch that, Cedric, like the Clippers don't know what that's like. That's all they've ever done. Watch other teams win championships because they don't do it. So ain't nothing changed there. Nah, status quo.
I feel that, with you, what you're going to get is some of those things that we didn't know about. Some of those Danny Ainge stories that you had on the side that you couldn't talk about, or some things you might have talked with the owners of the governors of the Celtics that you can now kind of get off your chest. I think that's one of the things that I loved about doing the podcast. Just some of the things that I wanted to say, but you're kind of reluctant. And right. Still me, I still hold back a little bit because, I'm kind of working for the Celtics, but this definitely has to be so much more freedom for you.
Oh my God, it is. It is. I mean, I think about just so many crazy stories, like Brad Stevens and when he was hired and how, and I haven't talked about this before, but there was another college coach that was on the Celtics radar at that time that he wasn't the guy they wanted, but he was the guy that was in the conversation to the point where that guy actually started soliciting other assistant coaches because he thought he was going to get that job in Boston, which he was not. And we'll get into that at some point in the podcast.
I was going to say, you got me right now. I'm ready to look at your next podcast because I want to know when that comes up.
And that's really what this is about, Shed. I mean, it's as you pointed out, it's shedding light on a lot of stories that just haven't been told before, that we now have a platform to do that. And having Kwani Lunis in the mix as well, it gives us a very fresh, unique perspective on a lot of issues that are going on right now in the NBA that we may not necessarily be locking in on, that she being in that demographic age-wise and gender-wise has a much more, her antennas are a little bit higher up in the stratosphere on some of that stuff. Mine.
What's the differences that you say that you look at between yourself and her? First of all, what is your age now, if I can ask you that?
Oh, I'm late 40s.
Okay, you're late 40s, and she is
mid 20s.
Mid 20s. So big difference, almost because you have a child that is in his 20s, right? So yeah, it's really going to be interesting.
Well, in a lot of ways, talking with her in a lot of ways is some of the conversations I had with my son, who he's in the communications game. He does audio podcasting. And so we talk a lot about sports. And a lot of the conversations are very similar to what I had with Kwani, except Kwani got a little bit more attitude, got a little more edge. And I'm okay with that because, I will push back and she'll push back just as hard. And you need that to have, I think, engaging conversation. But you're right. I mean, the fact that we're part of two different generations, if you will, we have two very different and unique lenses on how the sports landscape looks. And it's not necessarily that they're at opposition with each other, they're just different. And I think that's one of the things that's going to give our podcast, some serious weight, is the fact that you're not just getting, two guys in the same age, same color, same look, telling you pretty much the same thing, backing one another up. We're going to have some moments where I'm going to say something and Kwani's going to be like, bruh, check yourself. That ain't how this is going to go. And I'm going to be like, sister girl, you need to check yourself because this is how it is going to go. And we're going to have that kind of back and forth because that's kind of what we do. One of the things her and we talked about is that, a lot of the conversations that you'll see us having on camera are conversations that we've had in the studios when we were working together. And I think it's great that we're going to allow people to kind of see some of those conversations and have those conversations amplified. I'm excited about this. I really am. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm working with somebody that I really believe in, and someone that does not see things exactly how I do. And we don't have enough of that in this world, Cedric. I ain't going to go too political on you and everything, but we don't have enough people who can agree to disagree in this world. And I think it always makes for engaging conversations when you got two people who at the end of the day are cool with each other, but in the midst of beginning sunrise to sunset, they're going to scrap.
One of the stories that I want to let people know about is part of, your family. And one of the so whenever I see you, it always comes across when I talk to you. I always think about the days when, you're a married man. And there were a couple of times where we talked about, I said, yo, man, let's go to this party. And your line to me was, it ain't worth it. It ain't. Your line, I love that because you talk about your wife. Man, I could go. I'll let you tell the story.
Yeah. I mean, there are times where we could go to certain places and it would be events that are open for public. But sometimes you find yourself, you're not necessarily looking for trouble, but trouble's in that room. So you either roll the dice, find yourself in a sticky spot because you put yourself there, or you be like, no, I'm good.
I love that part when I used to challenge you. Yo, where you gonna go?
Yes, Cedric, you used to be the bad one on the right side. Be like, hey, Sherrod, let's go to this place. And I'm like, Cedric, I'm listening to the gift.
I love that line. You tell me it ain't worth it. I gotta go home. It ain't worth it. Now you had a great relationship that you're gonna bring some of the stuff that when you covered the bad boys, the Pistons.
Yes.
Your relationship, someone with Ricky Mahorn and those guys in that area, some new insight, because now we're, especially with the day of COVID, we're starting to live through the past. And, the big dance, the last dance with Michael was such a huge thing that happened. The Pistons were right in the middle or at the end of the beginning or the ending of where Michael started.
Yeah. And for me, I was around that team at a time when they were at the pinnacle of NBA greatness. And so there are lots of stories that, I have stored away. I mean, like when I was there, when they won the title in 2004 with Rip Hamilton and Chauncey Billups and all those guys. And there were little things that they did that people didn't realize played a role in them winning a title. Things like Larry Brown, for example, the first play of every single game, if they win the jump ball, was get that damn ball to Ben Wallace and let him go to work, because big fella knew he wasn't touching the rock much at all, if at all, after that. So they made a point of getting him the ball first possession every single time they got the ball on offense, and they just cleared out and let him go to work. And if he scored, great. If he didn't, we gave you a shot. It's little things like that that help them build team chemistry and bonding and trust, knowing that he ain't going to get you 25, 30 points. But if you throw the big fella a bone, he going to get you 15 rebounds.
I don't know any other brothers in my time that I can think of that had developed that kind of chemistry. And I was on championship teams. We liked each other. But with those, it's like those dudes were like blood brothers. Like, it's like the way they perform, it was like bad boys. And you hear them say bad boys for life, like that movie. It just seemed like the way they were.
It is. And it started with the Isaiah Thomases and the Joe Dumars, and it carried on with the Chauncey Billups, Rip Hamiltons, Ben Wallace's, Rasheed Wallace, who, again, you are not going to get me to crap on Rasheed Wallace. You will not get that to happen. That's another guy that there's tons of stories. And you see about the technicals and you hear about the fouls, but what you don't realize is this brother is knowledgeable on NASCAR. I know this because we literally had a conversation about NASCAR. And needless to say, mind-blowing. But when you talk about the Celtics, I think about Rajon Rondo, a guy that is very polarizing. But when I think about like my memories of Rondo, I remember sitting in the locker room and it was like maybe 5 of us. And we were talking about the All-Star game, and we were having a very candid conversation about who should be in and who should be out. And Rondo let it be known who he thought should be in. You know what the difference was between that and conversations now, other than the COVID thing? Rondo was in a place where he knew that conversation wasn't going nowhere. He knew we weren't going to dime him out. He knew we weren't going to say, oh, Rondo said that so-and-so shouldn't be an All-Star. You don't get that comfort level anymore. It's going to be hard for these young cats in like 10, 15, 20 years to have stories, because all their stories are going to be on Zoom. And I'm going to be like, well, damn, I was there for that conversation. So what are you telling me that I don't know? That's what this podcast is going to be bringing forth to light, bringing some of those conversations that have occurred that are really cool stories that didn't make their way onto Twitter. They didn't find a home in social media. They were just conversations that were really good, really wholesome, and really said a lot about those individuals that you might look at them a little bit differently.
Well, tell me something about this current Celtic team or the last couple of years you've had them. I'm fascinated with this. Brad Stevens could have maybe wasn't their first choice for the coach. That is really cool. But tell me some of the insight that you saw with the team going forth now with Jason Tatum's and in particular, Kyrie Irving.
You know what? Kyrie is a hard one for me because it's like there's so many things about him that I genuinely like as a person.
Let me ask you this. Are you a pawn? I mean, that's what Kyrie said. Kyrie said, I don't talk to pawns, so I don't do that.
I don't play chess, so I guess I'm not a pawn. I don't play the game of chess. So I guess I'm not. But the thing about there's so many things that he says that I really agree with, but no, he can't help himself but take it that one step too far. And it's just like, I gotta back. It's to me, it's like having that guy at the poker table that is doing a really good job. You're like, man, he's really playing his hands well. And then just when you're really ready to compliment him, he gonna go all in and ain't got a damn number red in his hand. Ain't got a high card to first. You thinking you went all in for that? You went all with that hand to play? So he's a tough one. But the thing about Kyrie and the thing about the Celtics that I'm thinking more and more about, and you, I think, have some perspective on this. I think there's a difference between establishing a winning culture and establishing a championship winning culture. I think the Celtics have a winning culture. I'm not convinced it's a championship winning culture because when I look at the teams that are winning championships, there are things that they're doing that Boston is not. There are players that they're attracting, Boston is not. And maybe most important, Sad, players they're able to retain that Boston cannot. There used to be the issue where the Celtics could not get any superstars to come here. Now they can't get anyone to stay. It's a problem that I think is going to keep them at least a layer or two from being a championship winning culture. Look at the Patriots. I mean, granted, this year's a down year, obviously, but when you look at the guys that kind of rolled through here before, guys like Randy Moss, guys like you start going down the list of guys who were here for a hot minute, did the damn thing and bounced. That's what championship winning cultures can bring.
But didn't this Jason Tatum signing, did that not squash some of that noise about not retaining and keeping your star players?
No.
And Brown.
No, because those, they don't know any different. Mm-hmm. It's not like they had something to compare their experience in Boston to when they were making a decision whether Rio. When you're Al Horford, you've had Boston, you've had Atlanta. The money was an issue. We know that. And he got his money. And now he's in Oklahoma City trying to do what he does. Kyrie Irving was in Cleveland and Boston. He had a choice. He had different options as far as his experience was concerned. Gordon Hayward was in Utah, was in Boston. He had something to compare his experience in Boston to. All of them did. And ultimately, they decided that they were better off going somewhere else than staying put in Boston.
Well, with the two guys you talk about, when you talk about Al and you're talking about Gordon, to me, it was just about the money. It was about the money. It wasn't about the culture, other than the fact that I do believe in Gordon's case that Gordon looked at himself and you could hear it with his wife. He became maybe a fifth and maybe sixth player option. And I think that bothered him. Yeah. But with Kyrie, the uniqueness of that situation is what makes Kyrie happy. And right. It's almost to the point where I believe the Celtics, to a degree, I looked at some of the things that are said right now about James Harden. I don't think the Celtics were that bad, right. But they talked about James Harden saying, well, we get in a town and I want to stay overnight, and they would change their plane schedule or they would do different things. Even there were things heard about Kyrie is like when balls had to be signed for underprivileged kids, Kyrie said, well, I'm just not interested. And it wasn't like he was pissed off at anybody, but I think sometimes you give players that you want to keep so much leeway that they kind of it's almost like a kid. You're only going to give your son so much leeway.
Right.
And then you go, okay, I'm dad, you're the son, we're going to do it the way I want it. So I that's the way I felt about those situations.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking a little bit about what I like to call the Richie Rich syndrome, where you treat them as if they got all the keys to the palace, they should get whatever they want. And when you're bringing someone into your culture who has that kind of mindset, problems are going to happen. I mean, I when I think back to when Kyrie was here, I mean, Kyrie and Jaylen Brown are cool with each other. They don't have any like angst or anything like that. But there was tension, undeniable tension, when they were teammates. And no one, and the thing about Jaylen, and I respect the hell out of him for this, he was one of the few, hell, I'd even say the only one that would publicly push back on some of the nonsense that Kyrie was speaking. You know, when Kyrie was talking about the young guys, there was only one of those young guys who was flapping his gums and saying, well, you know what? It ain't just young guys that need to step their game. It's not just young guys that need to be held accountable. And that's why, to me, I'm rocking and rolling with Jaylen Brown forever. That's my dog for life. I'm rolling because
you know
he
what?
showed.
And I am like you with that. What he's done on the court, how we've watched him develop, and what he's done off the court makes him the captain of this team because he has shown a way he's grown as a basketball player, not afraid to take the big shots in the big moment. And in a way, I feel like, you know, the worst thing about it is he's always going to be second tier because it's always going to be Jason Tatum's team. But is he smart enough to utilize that and understand that for his benefit and the team's benefit?
Yeah, and for him speaking out the way he did from time to time with, you know, in response to some of the stuff Kyrie said, that was a huge, huge gamble on his part. Because let's be real, Cedric, it's not like we haven't seen a role player speak out against the star player and then that role player disappears. Craig Hodges, hello.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Exactly.
Drive safely. Bye-bye.
Exactly. So, I mean, the fact that he was brave enough to speak out, bold enough to say what he said, and back it up by steady progression on and off the court. I'm rocking with Jaylen for life, man.
I have, I've always done this with everybody. And I found last time, I asked this for Corey Sellers. And for Corey Sellers,
that was a great podcast, by the way. I did not know that the Cedric Maxwell reach extended into politics with Bakari. That was a hell of a podcast.
Well, I try to be diversified with some of the things I did. But one of the questions I asked him, he ended up taking that question to President Obama and asking, and we got virtually the same kind of response. So I'll ask you the question. Give me your Mount Rushmore of sports.
Ooh. And
you can't be wrong. You got 4 people that you're taking anytime, different sports, same sports. I don't care from Detroit, wherever it is, but give me your Mount Rushmore of sports.
I would say Jesse Owens.
Okay.
I would say Bill Russell. I would say Venus Williams.
Okay.
And my 4th member would be.
It's always that 4.
Yeah. You know what? I gotta go. I gotta go. Tom Brady.
Okay.
I gotta go. Tom Brady.
Now I just want to ask you. And you're not wrong, but and you really don't have to qualify. But I still have to ask you, why Venus and not Serena? Because I took Serena over Venus. So could you just tell me the difference between the two and why you picked that one over the other one?
Because I think Serena benefited heavily from the battles fought by Venus. Even though they were kind of in the same period of time, Venus was the one whose star took off first. Venus was the one that was dealing with a lot of the criticism and second guessing and a lot of the racism that Serena dealt with to a certain extent, but Venus had to deal with that first. And because she dealt with it first, I thought it helped Serena better handle it when she had to go through some of those issues. And now, if you're talking about who was the better tennis player, Serena, hands down. You will not get any pushback from me on that. But in terms of being an elite, difference-making, game-changing athlete, I'm convinced that if it wasn't for Venus, Serena would not have been able to extend the way she has. And Naomi, who is just killing it, I mean, killing it in the tennis game right now, would not be where she's at. And to me, Venus is the blueprint that they followed and tweaked to their own game and modifications to where they're all great. But Venus, to me, I got to rock with her.
Wow, that is such an interesting take on some of the people you've had and some of the people that you actually left out. I'll give you my list. And again, you're not wrong, but I'm just giving you my list. It was Muhammad Ali.
Yes.
Tiger Woods.
Yep.
And I went with Serena Williams.
Mm-hmm.
And I went with Michael Jordan. And those were mine because I just felt like I looked at Ali, what he did. Tiger Woods gave the masses who had never even thought about golf being cool, an opportunity to show a whole nother light to young Black kids who had never played before. And I just thought that was just something that really struck me during my time.
Yeah, Muhammad was a tough one to
What
leave off.
you said about Jesse Owens, he had to fight. He was fighting Hitler, and he was fighting the whole Nazi regime. I just think that was. I mean, that would have been just like Joe Louis, another one. Just so many great ones that you have that just defy, time or who they are.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about having Mount Rushmores is that, to your point, you can't really screw that up. Everyone that you mentioned would easily is deserving of being there. Muhammad was a tough one for me to leave off because I've always respected the position that he took. I mean, just to give you a little background about me, my dad was in the Army for 25 years. I come from a long line of military folks. At one point, when I was in high school, I was seriously thinking about West Point. West Point had actually started reaching out to me back when I was in 8th grade to see if I was interested in attending there. So I've always had this deep amount of respect for the military. But the one thing that people, I think, lose sight of when they talk about Muhammad Ali is that what he was doing was expressing himself and what he wanted to do and not be involved in a war that he just didn't believe in. And when you look at our country and the foundation for which it's built upon, having that freedom of expression is something that we tend to take for granted. And Muhammad Ali, whether you agree or disagree with him, was willing to fight that battle. And ultimately, he was deemed to be someone whose fight was worth it. And it's funny how in that moment, people was hating on him left and right. But over time, they accepted him. And Kaepernick, hating on him in that moment when he's kneeling. And now you got the damn commissioner coming out saying, all Black Lives Matter. Didn't matter August 26, 2016, but they matter today. To me, those are the people that when I think about leadership and I think about lifetime difference makers, people who just move the needle in a way that the needle will never be moved before, those are the ones that I have the utmost respect for. The ones who stood in the middle of the storm and did not budge. When everyone else is flying around, getting behind them, getting in front of them, they just stand there like, this is my position, I ain't budging. Boom. Much respect.
This year, 2020, has been, I guess, in my lifetime, in your lifetime, the most unique, the most challenging, the most emotional. What did you get out of 2020? Black Lives Matter, Kobe Bryant dying. It's just like you go to a month and you pick a day and boom, you got some instant, not a classic, but just something that is fantastic.
Yeah, this year has been like any other because the one thing that I really appreciated was just how there really seemed to be, and I did a webinar series on this earlier called Innovation in Isolation, just looking at how people are changing, modifying what they're doing in this, this period of separation, social distancing and all that. And I look at people who, for example, could make masks in their kitchen. And all of a sudden they're like multimillionaires. I look at, groups and people coming together in ways they've never came before. I remember, like, for example, when they were protesting in Boston, and I was there with Marcus Smart, and him and I were walking, just up and down the streets together. And we, at one point, there must have been like maybe, I don't know, 17, 18 white people just went past us. And we both had this look like, damn, it's a fight. The fight that they're in now is one that we're used to being in. And when I say us, I mean like Black folks. The protests amplified, this is not just our fight anymore. And I don't know if that same energy is present at this very moment, but there was a point in this summer when it was a fight that Black, white, Native American, Latino, there was this universal collection of energies coming together in a way I'd never seen before. And it's just in my experience, white folks are kind of the last ones to show up to these kind of parties. And yet here, me and Marcus are walking up and down, and we go past like 17, 18 white people, and we just have this look at just like, did that just happen? That was like, that's when I think about 2020, that's one of my big takeaways is that there was at one point a unification of people that we had not seen in a long time. And I just pray that we can continue along those lines. I love the fact that players held owners a little bit more accountable, getting them to move the needle in ways that they probably didn't want to. I mean, I don't think owners wanted to open up their arenas for polling places, but the players pushed for that, and they got that. I'm pretty sure the owners didn't want to commit all those millions and millions of dollars to all these different organizations and groups, but the players pushed for that, and they got that. So I just hope that same energy we saw in the bubble can transfer itself outside, because one of the things that I thought Mark Spears, who's on our first A-List podcast, he made a great point. I just hope that energy in the bubble doesn't burst. That's what I'm hopeful for. So
I find that to be very unique because I was born in 1955. So the time that I look at that you're talking about that seems like it's almost in a mirror is the 60s, because you had those same people marching for civil rights. You had all these people. You had Jewish people and Black people and Native Americans and down the line all together. Now, push forward to now, 2020, I'm starting to see that same coalition kind of come back together, which to me is so unique in the craziest way.
Yeah, it is. And that's, my mom was born around the same time as you, and that's one of the things that she was telling me about.
Oh, that hurt. Oh, damn, that hurt. Damn, that hurt me then when you said that. Your mom
was young. She was a young woman. She was a young woman when I came into the world. Young woman. Let me just put like you a young man.
You're on right now. But it is true when you think about those times of being and you. Do you remember a time when I just think that we have all had this as Black men, when you looked at yourself and said, damn, I'm Black. And it just came to you just like, and you're in a room and you and I are in kind of, very similar environment. The fact that we're here in Boston and I've been here for my broadcasting career. This is my 25th or 26th year. And for my side of it, being an analyst, I've seen very few people that look like me. You as a writer, you've seen very few people who look like you and all have a different opinion. Did that strike you in that way?
You know what? It didn't, because when I was in Detroit before I came here, I would come to Boston a couple times a year. And other than you, Willie May, I really didn't see any Black people in any way, shape, or form involved with the media. And so that was what I went into this eyes wide open expecting. I came here expecting things to be so much worse than they were. And the one thing that I tell people, about my experience in Boston is that you have to have the ability to discern between the community of Boston and the Boston Celtics when you're talking about diversity, because the two are not one and the same. When you look at the Celtics from a historical standpoint, when you talk about diversity, it is not anywhere close. It's a complete 180-degree difference between them and the community of New England, which has not always been as open-minded and forthcoming to people of color as the Celtics as an organization, for the most part, have been. Now, can they be better? Absolutely. And they know this. And the Celtics can be better. The community can be better without question. But the hits that the Celtics as an organization takes from the outside when it comes to diversity, I just think a lot of that is unfounded. And frankly, it's just wrong.
Yeah. I've heard that from fellow players before, or I had a podcast and did it with James Worthy, and that's what he and I were talking about. It's like that racist ass Boston. He said, I had an uncle who was there. I was a big Celtic fan, But as I tell people, I said, Boston does not have a monopoly on racism.
Right.
As some people like, oh my God, you're from Boston. Oh my God, some of the worst things have happened to me, not in Boston, but in LA, when I was living in that, when I played for the Clippers at the time. So you see all these different things in your life, and Boston isn't that damn bad, or comparably so.
Yeah. And like for me, as someone who I lived in the South, lived in the Midwest, and as far as race issues are concerned, Boston, of those three places, was at the bottom of the pecking order in terms of problems, because I think part of that has to do with my job. I think that when people see you in a certain position, they look at you a certain way. And for us, I think that's been a positive. When I was in the Midwest covering the Pistons, I mean, look, Detroit is just grimy and gritty, and I love that about Detroit.
Detroit's black, though. That's all you see.
Exactly, and so because of that, it's just like, well, you may be doing this, that, and the other, but yo, you black, and so am I. So I'm just you ain't getting no different treatment than anyone else, and I respected that. I did. Now in the South, different story. Few times I had to check folks, and it. Let's put it this way: I'm just glad that there were enough people in the presence to intervene, because back then, young Sherrod wasn't nearly as cool, calm, and collected as the brother that you see right now. That dude was about that life. If you push that button, because remember, I grew up in upstate New York, and everyone was treated like everyone should be treated. Had no issues. From there to the South, it's a different story. And Cedric, being from North Carolina, which is where I was at, you already know. I ain't got to tell you.
I always say, I always had this joke that we're with the Celtics, and a couple of white guys were there who worked in the office, and I said, one of the lines you'd always get from a white guy here was, "You want to go? You want to go? Let's fucking go. Let's go." And he do his hands like that. You'd be like, "Oh hell!" It's only pop when the guy goes like, "You want to go?" Nobody else says that any place around where you see a brother like, "Let's go." Let's go where? But just like,
we're going to the mall, get a sandwich, get a milkshake, get some lobster. What are we gonna do?
I found this conversation with you to be so fascinating, in the fact that who we are, where we've been, and where we're going, and the network with the whole thing with the podcast, to me, is such a way to, for me, it is almost like therapy, because I'm able to get some stuff out that I haven't been able to get out. I told somebody a story, and you would have to be the one that would back this up. I was telling you the story one time how ESPN called me. You might remember this. And ESPN wanted to do a story with me for Black History Month, during Black History Month, of the legend of the leprechaun.
Oh,
yeah. They said that at the top, they said the leprechaun might have been a monkey that escaped from the circus that people saw. And they were sending their truck to Boston to interview me. And I told you the story, and I said, you know what? It was a black dude that called me. I said, dude, you might want to check your sources or check the guy who sent you. And you're like, yeah, I know that dude. And I was like, really? That was how crazy they were. I remember you just looking at me like, are you serious? Yes. And this happened no more than about 5 years ago.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about that. And it took me a minute to marinate on what you said. Because it didn't really, I'm like, no, he didn't say something about no damn leprechaun monkey. This must be like one of them weird out of body things where I'm in the press room right now, but I'm daydreaming about some nonsense that ain't happening. Let me snap out of it. But you was right. You was real. That was real. Again, this is the thing that I talk to a lot of people about, is that when you are looking at diversity can't just be a color thing or a gender thing. It has to also encompass an ideological thing. Diversity of thought is something that we don't think enough about. Mm-hmm. And just because you a certain skin color or a certain gender doesn't mean you have an understanding of issues that people of that color or people of that gender are dealing with. Like, to me, anytime you make any reference to doing something, journalistically speaking, that involves people of color and a monkey, you might want to rethink what you're trying to do. To me, it's right up there with drawing analogies between individuals and Hitler. You just stay. To me, that's the third rail of discussion. You don't touch it, because more times than not, it's gonna blow up in your face, and you're gonna get in more trouble, and it's just bad for business.
Yeah, I By now, show me that emblem you have on your shirt again one more time. All right. At this school right now, BU.
Don't you put us on blast.
No, I'm gonna put you on blast because you are teaching a class there.
Mm-hmm.
So for them to see a professor of color must already be a shock to their system, because I'm sure there are not as many people of color on that faculty. Although I know that's where Martin Luther King ended up doing his seminary work at BU. But how do you feel about that when you think about yourself being that authoritative figure when it comes to giving out a grade and people looking at you, as that person of color?
Well, the one thing that I'll say just right off the top is the class that I'm teaching used to be taught by Michael Holley. And so they're used to having, but even with that being said, you have to think about how can you level up the experience for them, whether it's Michael Holley or whoever taught it before me. And the one thing that I did with my students this last semester is I needed them to understand that the world journalistically that they're going into is going to be more diverse than what they might understand. And so we had speakers who were Black. We had speakers who were Asian Americans. We had speakers who were white females. I had like 11 speakers, and all but I only had 2 white males. Everyone else was either person of color or female. And that's how I want it. I think that they need to understand. To me, that point, if they only took one thing out of my class, it would be that you are going into a world that will be very diverse. And the sooner you understand that, the better off you're going to be. And the only way I can get you to understand that is for me to bring in Asian Americans on camera, Black women who are producers, other women who are doing podcasts in sports specifically, and just making their experience one that you come away feeling as though, oh, I guess everyone ain't gonna be like me.
So you're saying really this is the good old boy network is starting to die. I know it's still there, but it's starting to die down.
Well, I will not let it live on. Let's put it that way. I can't say if it's dying down, but I'm doing my part to give it a heart attack and put it in the hospital and put it away for good, because it doesn't align with what we are and who we are as a country. I mean, and again, don't want to get on the political soapbox too much, but if we're a country that was founded on diverse personalities and thoughts and just this melting pot, I remember hearing that a lot when I was a kid. Melting pot, America, melting. And all of a sudden, we're not so much. I think we need, if you talk about, wanting us to be the best that we can be as a nation, we have to understand that not all of us are going to be the same, that you have to have lanes in which people can navigate that aren't necessarily lanes that look like you. Not everyone's going to drive the same, 4-door sedan. Some are going to be a little more rickety than others. Some are going to be better than that. We have to embrace and appreciate each other, and we don't do enough of that. And in journalism, let's just keep it real. There's not enough people of color in Boston. And again, to me, it goes back to what you were saying earlier. Boston, when it comes to racism, Boston does not have, proprietary rights on that.
The keys to the city.
Right. No, but when it comes to diversity or lack of diversity, Boston doesn't have proprietary rights on that either. And so what I'm trying to do is do whatever I can to enhance that, to bring about diversity, not only in terms of diversity in terms of people, but in diversity of thought. I'm with the National Association of Black Journalists Sports Task Force. I'm the chairman of that. And one of my big things is trying to create as many lanes of diversity within our group. That's why I work with the LGBTQ community. That's why I work with inclusion and equity and all these different groups. And I work with, folks who don't look like me. And I'm okay with that, because guess what? I know what it's like to be in that room when no one looks like you or thinks like you. It kind of sucks.
Yeah, that is. Last question I'll ask you, and this is kind of one that you can go anywhere with, but talk about LeBron James and just what he's been about. The first, I want to say, superstar in a cultural age of media, and the things that you see him and people who have attacked him and what he's done. Just give us a spiel on who he is and how you view him going into this next millennium.
You know what? The thing about LeBron James, and I having my initial interaction with him when I was in Detroit and he was in Cleveland, the evolution that he's gone through is phenomenal. Let me tell you a quick story about my first LeBron James interaction. This was like his, I think it was his rookie season, and Paul Silas was the head coach. And LeBron, was kind of like kind of what you would expect an 18-year-old superstar. I'm running the show. I do what I want to do when I want to do it. They had a morning shoot around, and the only person from the media that was there was me. And so Paul Silas comes up to me and says, anyone you want to talk to? I was like, I'd like to talk to the young fella for a little bit. So he goes over to LeBron, says, this guy wants to talk to you. LeBron don't want to talk. Don't want to talk. He's ready to go back to the hotel or whatever the hell he's doing. Paul is not having that. Paul says, you're going to talk to him. And I'm not going to get into Paul's exact words, but it's something to the effect that he has a job to do. He's trying to do his job. He's not going to keep you long. Get this man 5 minutes so he can do his job. And it was one of the worst interviews I've ever had because LeBron was in that kind of 3 words, 4-word, 5-word responses. And then about maybe after 2.5, 3 minutes, he started giving me something a little bit more. And he wasn't bad. He wasn't bad. And I just remember it wasn't too long after that Paul got fired.
Here's the lead into this. You don't tell LeBron what to do, okay, or who to speak to. And guess what? He got fired.
And I bring that full circle because that to me was LeBron at just a very immature stage of his growth and development. And to see where he's at now, where he is putting so many others ahead of himself. And I'm talking not off the court. I'm talking about just his work with schools, his work with just being more engaged politically speaking. And obviously what he does on the floor, he's just phenomenal. He's the greatest player of this generation. But for me, I look at him a little bit different than most people because I think back to that moment when he gave me that real, I'm going to talk to you, but only because my coach at the moment is telling me to do this, and see where he's at now. I'm blown away by how much he's grown because from that initial impression, I thought this guy was going to be a jerk and a straight up a-hole for his entire NBA career. And LeBron, you can say a lot of things about him, but LeBron, the man, the leader, the philanthropist, I mean, I'm all on board with that. He's been phenomenal for the league and for, frankly, for Black men, really, as far as role models.
Well, I'm going to give you a due and say thank you for being on my podcast. And this is Sherrod Blakely, who is with me and has his own podcast. So all my listeners and all my viewers, I want you to go in because I'm going to go in because I want to hear this Brad Stevens story about Brad might not have been the choice, or if he was, who was the second guy. So I can't wait to hear that information. You don't have to let it out, brother. You have to give me a clue like a brother. Yo, man, come on, man. Let me in on a little bit.
Let me put this in the chat.
Let it go. So thank you again for coming on with me. I appreciate it.
No problem, sir. A-List Podcast, Sherrod Blakely, Kwani Lunis, all apps, all your podcasting apps, we are there.
Thank you, my man.
Appreciate it.
Peace out.